back to the Beyond Broadcast podcast, a show which takes a behind-the-scenes look at industry professionals and their lives working in the broadcasting and entertainment industry. Today, I'm speaking with a film editor and producer, Edward Sampson. Born in Ruakaka and now based in Auckland, Edward has been perfecting pace and trimming the edges since 12 years old. The passion hasn't faltered, with Edward going on to work on a bunch of shorts, documentaries, TV series, and a couple of feature films in the process. We're speaking to Edward after the release of his latest film, Devils on Horses. Welcome to the show, Edward. Really looking forward to dipping into a little bit about you, mate. So how's things?
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for inviting me on to a fabulous show.
Oh, mate, the pleasure is all mine. And I always like to start back in the early days, Edward, because I feel like that really sets the scene for a lot of people and kind of how they get into the industry. So you grew up in the beautiful Ruakaka during the 80s, which I'm just imagining a lot of the time it's you spending time at the beach, a very quiet lifestyle. Would that be kind of like the correct assumption, or what was your childhood like down in that beautiful town?
I totally agree. It is that consumption where I spent a lot of time at the beach, just walking on the beach. Wasn't into the surfing or swimming, but I enjoyed the beach. And being in the 80s, that era where back in those days you only had two channels on TV, Channel 1 and Channel 2. VHS slowly came out. The cinema was in Whangarei, so that's like a half an hour's drive. So you tended to create your own world because you were limited to what you have back then to what you have today. So it's totally different now.
Yeah, you mentioned that it was a 30-minute drive, and I saw in a previous interview that you mentioned that American television was kind of like a staple of your childhood, and I can agree with you, even just growing up in the 90s where, yeah, like you said, the two-channel, I think by that point they got three, but American television, so is there any particular shows that you remember from those days and you look back on fondly that still are stuck in your mind?
It's funny because you grew up with like Knight Rider, Chips, Dukes of Hazzard. Those shows used to be on Channel 2, and Channel 1 was quite more BBC style period dramas. And then on a Sunday afternoon or Sunday evening on TV, you used to have some soppy show that it's like, ugh. So TV wasn't the same. But the great thing is VHS came around. So it enabled you to go to the local VHS store, which there was one in Ruakaka, and to get the films out. So, yeah, it's a little bit different now. I think but there were some really cool shows growing up, and there were episodes that you're influenced by the Yanks. Whereas New Zealand, I think New Zealand wasn't really big on itself back then. I think you had Country Calendar, you had Fair Go, there'd be the odd New Zealand drama that came through, but it wasn't that much New Zealand made content. So I think we were more, how you describe New Zealand didn't like seeing itself on camera is a word to use. Maybe, and it's changed quite a lot now where we sort of used to seeing ourselves on TV, and I think that's continued to grow a lot more where we are telling those stories.
It's interesting you hit on that because I've definitely had chats previous to ours where we've talked about representation and media, and yeah, you hit the nail on the head because I have heard this, that there was almost like a bit of a shame in relation to anything New Zealand, whether it be film or television, and I think for a while it really took a lot of strides before a New Zealand film was appreciated to its full degree. And the interesting thing for me is the fact that you touch on VHS and how having access to that was kind of being able to access kind of like a wider market of like potentially creative things that you could see. But the interesting thing I love about this, mate, is the fact that I heard that you were making films from a very young age, 12 if I'm not mistaken, using a Super 8 camera and an editing desk that you bought from a paper run. So how did that start? What made you make that decision of being like, you know what, I want to start making my own stuff, start investing in what is like a pretty niche toy to be buying for yourself? What was it that made you think, oh, I'm going to get a camera and an editing desk?
I was influenced by, so back in the 80s, what's the biggest filmmaker there? George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was at his game, so you had, and I still believe in this, I think Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of the best scripts ever written. It's a perfect Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And it was influenced by Steven Spielberg's Raiders of the Lost Ark, which Lawrence Kasdan did the story, and George Lucas wrote the story. So it was influenced by Spielberg because he had The Goonies, Back to the Future, all those movies coming through. VHS allowed us to watch those films over and over again, because going to cinema in Whangarei, there was only 2 cinemas back then. There was Hoyt's and there was one in Carmo, from my understanding. And so it's a bit limited to what you can see. But I love the 80s movies coming through. I wasn't a big fan of, because back then we had like High 8 and VHS with capturing on camera. I got given a Standard 8 camera, which I still have today. And with Standard 8 film, you shoot on the camera, then you take the film out in the dark, of course, flip it over, and you use the other side of the wheel. So it's like a 25-foot wheel, but the length of that film was 50 feet. Because what you did was you split the film in half, and then that film got joined. So I started experimenting with the camera, and for my paper run, I later on bought a Super 8 camera, which had battery power. And with the Super 8, it was just a bit more wider, so it gave a bit more of a cinematic length. But how I made the films was we shot in camera to cut it. So, because editing film was a pain in the butt, even though I had the little desk, the little audio, the little editorial to cut it, and how you used to cut it is you spice it, glue it, which I found a little bit frustrating. Later on discover you can use tape, but I never had that at the time. Glue it, rub the emulsion off the film, glue it, let it dry, and then you go to the next cut. So the way I got around that was shoot the film in camera. So I did a film called Attack with the Lawnmower. So basically I cast my brother in it. The lawnmower comes to life and it kills my brother. So yeah, so that's like a little 3-minute film, because the 50 feet reel film lasted for about 3.5 minutes, roughly at 24 frames per second. And another film we made was, we watched Cliffhanger. It's like, oh wow, let's do a little Cliffhanger movie at the back of the cliff that we have. So I did that, and I did a World War One film as well, where I cast my sister in it. So at the time she was only like 5 or 6. So, and then did some visual effects shots with some models, the plane catching on fire. So, and the great thing is, I've actually restored those films onto ProRes by sort of slowly cleaning them all up, because the downside of the film was scratchy. So every time you ran it through the projector, you get a little bit more scratch again. So that's how I got into the filmmaking, and it was Spielberg. That. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's very much, the kind of run and gun filmmaking, which is like kind of the epitome of anyone that kind of starts working in anything relating to editing or filmmaking itself. You always hear the stories of like Robert Rodriguez and that, buying cheap gear and just trying it out and seeing what they can make from like little budget. And did that kind of continue even to your days at Bream Bay College? You were still kind of like fostering this whole filmmaking DIY sort of attitude of splicing together tape and making little short films, or was it something that kind of took a back seat?
No, I was doing this all at home. I love film. I think I was put off by VHS due to, I did the little video at the school, and my cameraman decided to put the camera on his back, and what you had in mind never transfer across. So I was quite put off from that scenario. Whereas when I realized, if I control the camera, control the action, I can get my vision across the screen a lot more. And the problem was that you're trying to focus, trying to get the right amateur, which you sort of understood at the time, but didn't quite understand what you're trying to do. So you're experimenting all along with film. Because that's a great thing about film, is that you've only got one shot at doing it. Because once you ran out of film, because that costs money. Because I think back then, $20 or $30 per reel, back in the late 80s and early 90s, it was quite expensive. And that film had to go all the way to Australia, Melbourne, to get processed. So that took like 4 to 5 weeks to come back to you. And then you get the rushes that you shot, and you look at it and go, oh, it's not what I had in mind, but so you try to trim it back down. But it was a good way of doing it, and I'm going to be frankly on this, I used to hate editing. I used to hate it. Now I do editing, but film was a little bit, frustrating at the time. But a good way to learn.
Did you almost see yourself becoming a camera person before you would have thought you would ever become an editor? Was that kind of like the idea that you had in your mind was, at some point, I'm going to be a filmmaker, cameraman, like I'm going to be the DOP and kind of take control of where I feel like the vision's going to come from? Or was it kind of like you knew you wanted to do editing, but you found it difficult still at that point?
I think I just fell into editing just by chance, because I ended up coming through post-production. So basically, I went down to Wellington in the mid-1990s to do a course. It was a skill pathway course, I think back in 95. And that was all paid for by the government. It was a 3-month course, first time ever that they ran it. So I had no student loan debt, except for I did borrow some money just to live on. But I think half of that money went on alcohol, because I discovered alcohol in Wellington. And Wellington was quite vibe back in the 90s. So you learnt to, and this was at the old Avalon Studios in Upper Hutt in Wellington. And the great thing is you learnt to edit on 16mm, play with the 16mm cameras, but I ended up somehow just fully into the post-production side of things just by default, which was, I think post-production is really, really good to know and understand, especially as a producer, because then you can work out the workflows, but at the same time you can understand, okay, we can shoot this on set, or is it better to do it in post?
That's interesting, yeah. And actually, I was going to touch on something, because you mentioned Avalon Studios, which for any listeners who aren't from New Zealand was quite a very legendary sort of location for television production. Do you remember it vividly, walking through Avalon? Because I think for a lot of people, it was considered like the mecca of New Zealand television at one point.
Yeah, because Avalon Studios had fantastic studios inside, and when we went for a walkthrough, Peter Jackson, I think he literally did a year or 6 months earlier, brain dead, and you could see all the blood stains on the biggest studio that they had there. So obviously they must have used the lawnmower to kill the victim, so you saw the blood there. But Avalon Studios was cool. I think it was a building that wasn't utilised to its full potential. It wasn't. It's changed a lot now. I haven't been here since the 90s, but it was going to a studio facility where TVNZ Channel 1 was broadcast from. It was great. So it's like, oh yeah, cool, I'm in television.
Oh, wild. And the fact that you had this course that was supplied by the government is even more strange to think about. Was that kind of like the first line of where people were starting to get educated in filmmaking? Because I can't imagine it would have been a very common course to do, especially at that time.
The interesting thing about the skill pathway course was the first 3 months you did everything about film and TV. You had to do a short film as a group. There's about 20 of us. And then afterwards, you got divided into Avalon Studios facilities. So there was about 3 or 4 facilities that they had. So you spent 6 or 9 months in those facilities. And if you're any good, you got offered a job. And then I got offered a job at Origin TV, which used to broadcast TV1. And then I stayed hanging around for about a year in Wellington. Then afterwards, I ended up applying for a position at a company called AAV. The funny thing is, all these companies that I work for in film and TV, they've all gone bust. Which is what does it tell you about the industry?
Yeah, totally, because it is quite fickle in many ways, and it's a commonality I've heard from a lot of people is that they say that the New Zealand industry, despite being quite small, it does mean that it's kind of always on its toes. Kind of, you always have to be a bit careful because of the fact that like there is only limited work, so you kind of have to pick and choose your jobs as you come. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, Edward, was I saw that you were in the Royal New Zealand Navy Reserves. Was this around the same time that you were doing television production? How did you come to get into the New Zealand Navy?
I was ended up joining. I did a volunteer thing called back in the 90s for a 6 weeks course. I think it's still going now. The Navy had one. I did the Navy, and then when I was in living in Wellington, I saw an advertisement for the New Zealand Navy Volunteer Reserves, and I applied for it, and then I got into it. And I've been with the reserves for the last 30 years. I'm just doing a regular force contract at the moment, which I'll finish in October to head back to co-produce and edit a feature film. But I've been following that path with my film career and with the Navy all the way through, and sometimes intertwined between the two, where I'll do something for the Navy, like create a video, or for the reserves in the early 2000s, I created them like a little promo video for them for free, so helped them out. And I did another one just recently for the Navy internal. So that's just been sort of into part of my, between the Navy and the film world, has been blended sort of together as one. And you pick up stuff in the Navy from leadership skills that you go, you know what, I can take what I've learned in the Navy and bring that to the civil world, or what I learned in the civil world, I can bring that across to what I'm doing in the Navy at the same time.
Yeah, because I can imagine you have to be disciplined, long hours, calculated, pretty precise with what you're doing, very similar to someone that's on a film set or someone that's in an edit suite as well. But I'm curious, what was behind your decision? Was this like, did you have family in the military? Was that kind of why you were like, you know what, I'm going to join up with the Navy? Or was this just something that kind of just stuck out to you one day and you're like, you know what, I'm going to give it a go?
It still stuck out to me because I did 6 weeks before, like it takes a year before, and I decided, I might just do this. So if I got no work in the film industry, I can do a little bit of Navy time, and that was sort of my semi-plan. Well, that's how it's sort of worked out at the moment. But it's just something I'm just doing, and something totally different to what you do in the film and TV industry. So it's something that I've actually enjoyed over the last 30 years.
Let's skip forward a bit, because
Yep.
there's obviously the work that you did at Avalon. And what would you say was your first proper role getting into the edit suite, being fully in control of the edit? And how did that come about?
So I was working for a company called DigiPost. So prior to that, the company called AAV, there was VHS duplication. So you learn all about duplication, broadcast machines. I went to Sydney for a year working for a company called Digital Pictures. That was post-production. And then I came back to New Zealand back in 2002 and took up a position at DigiPost. And I just fell into the editing. And I learnt on Avid. And how I learnt was I got involved in a feature film. And I said, okay, I can cut this. I'll do it for free. Because at the same time, that enabled me to pick up those editorial skills. And that's how you learn. You learn by doing a project. And you learn from making those mistakes. You learn what works, what doesn't work, how you do sound syncing, how do you do dailies. And that's how I actually fell into it. But what I did was I beat a lot of young people coming through who want to make films. So during my background posts, I can go work with them and help them out on their projects. And there'd be like maybe a budget or maybe no budget. And that's how I learnt. So it'd be short films, it'd be a couple of feature films I got involved with. So I could use those skills, what I had, and then maybe, I think it was 2009, I ended up getting myself my own Mac Studio. And by that stage, Final Cut Pro 5 was actually out, and I ended up buying a copy of that. That was on special. So that's how I really came about, was just not doing for professional people, but working for people that I knew in the industry or trying to break into the industry who are trying to bring their projects to the screen.
So it's almost like skilling yourself up by helping friends out, like much like what you were doing with the Navy, volunteering in a sense. Like you volunteered your time in order to learn a new skill and I'm guessing try out new things. And I saw that you were quite an early collaborator with writer and director James Napier Robertson. Was that exactly the same situation, that you two came together from a case of he needed someone in the edit suite or someone to help out? You came in and you offered your expertise. Is that what happened?
Yeah, correct. So and what I mentioned before, how you learn, it still applies today. So if anybody wants to
Mm,
get into film or TV, the best way to do is you create people who want to go into the industry. You cut a deal with them. Hey, let's support each other. If you go ahead in life, let's bring each other together and let's work on our projects, because you're upskilling yourself all the time. You're upskilling with learning to how you got to do the camera stuff, the editing, distribution, and more minds are better than one mind. And with James, I did a short film with James, and then he wanted to do a feature film. Okay, let's do a feature film. Let's bring on Tom Hearn, and that's how I got involved in that project, which was I'm Not Harry Jensen, back in 2009. So upskilling on that scenario, I learned a lot on that film. And then after that, I ended up working with Tim Telesky on Crackheads, which is about four people who get hooked on P. It's a black comedy, fantastic film, which is on Amazon Prime. Again, and I'm learning with Tim what he wants to do and learn how he operates. And again, I'm upskilling myself on that film. Because when I did I'm Not Harry Jensen, I was using Final Cut Pro 7, which back then was crashing to a certain degree. Then I went back
mm.
to Abbott and learned a lot more on Abbott to do Crackheads.
Was there an element of bravery and courage in a sense that you needed to have to kind of approach these people and be like, you know what, I'll be your guy for this? Or did it just come naturally for you? You were just like, you know what, like, I'm just going to throw it to the wind, see what happens. If something goes wrong, it goes wrong. If it goes right, it goes right. Is that kind of how it came about? Or did a lot of the time you have people approach you for working on these projects?
Yeah, so for Crackheads, Tim approached me and said, I'm keen to do it. What you got shoot on? We got shoot on Red camera. Okay, let's come up with a little workflow for it. We can use Resolve. And technology was changing because digital technology was starting to kick in 2008, 2009. You're moving away from recording on tape and also moving away on film. So you're shooting on HD. And then around 2010, 2011, 4K started to kick in, which Red was bringing on board. So the whole point was you learning that, hey, I can edit and I can do the post-supervising for the project because I know the workflows that will work best for the project. And at the same time, you upskilling yourself, you understand the workflows to make the show work. So you're always learning all the time.
Was it challenging for you having to adapt and learn these new platforms all the time? Because I'm sure there's people that have their own favorite platforms that they use. Like I know of editors that prefer just using DaVinci a lot of the time, or some people that just love using simple software like Premiere Pro, as weird as it sounds. Do you feel like that's sometimes a challenge that isn't always discussed when it comes to anyone entering the post field, that there is a lot that you need to learn from a technical standpoint?
I think, from my opinion, in the day, if you're using Adobe, Resolve, Final, or Abbott, the tools are similar. In the day, you're trying to tell a story. That's the key fundamental thing that you are trying to create in editorial. Story, story, story. And that's the most important thing. You can have all these fantastic tools, but if you're not telling that story, you're not winning. So, but it's down to you as an individual what tool you want to use, because at the end of the day, they're still going to do exactly the same thing as the other tools that are out there. It's what you feel comfortable with, and it's also how you want to tell the story. So, for example, Devils on Horses, I use Final Cut Pro. Final Cut Pro is fantastic. It has its downfalls, but there's no perfect software out there. I wish there was. I'm sure I can take A, B, C, and D software and bash them all up to one software. I'd love to be the perfect software, but it'll never be the perfect software because you always want something else in that tool.
Definitely. And it's probably going to be a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway, Edward, because it's obvious. Things have changed from tape to even early digital, among other things. And as you mentioned, like even the evident format of 4K. But has there been many changes to the process itself in terms of editing from the early 2000s compared to now, when you probably would have been predominantly still moving through the whole tape digital sort of phases? has there been that many changes, or is it fundamentally still the same? It's just different applications.
It's changed a lot. So I came through the days of film. So at DigiPost, you had a couple of telecine machines. So basically what that means is that the film was shot on film, 35mm or 60mm film. It got processed at the lab. Once it got processed, the print got brought to DigiPost, placed onto the telecine machine, and you scan the film on the telecine, and you output it to tape. And then once you finish the cut, the tape was brought into Abbott. Once you finish editing the project, commercial, whatever it may be, you'll go back to the negative, and you do a cut, and then they will have done a timing back then. So from that period of 20 years, we went from telecine in the early 2000s. Good example was Narnia, the first movie. They shot 1.3 million feet of film for that movie. So it was the biggest film in New Zealand back in 2005. That my boss said, hey, you'll never see this again in New Zealand, this amount of film. And then slowly, digital tape, you had mini DV, then you had DV cam, digital B cam, and then 2011 was the changing point. Because what happened in 2011, you had the Japanese tsunami, and that changed everything. Because suddenly, everybody was trying to grab HDSR, which was a tape format that was used for high television, and that factory got wiped out. And literally overnight, everybody went to tapeless recording. And then also in 2011, Apple brought out Final Cut Pro, which did not require digital tape. It required digital cards to import their data. So there was a big change in my era that I went from 1-inch digital to 4K, 8K, 12K now.
Was that scary for you at all, Edward, going through those massive changes? Because I think for anyone else, like, for example, it's like the classic arguments that you hear now where everyone's saying, oh, AI is going to take over. Was that kind of like a thing that you had in the back of your mind, thinking like, oh, geez, like, am I going to be able to adapt to the changes that are happening so dramatically? Or no, you were kind of already ahead of the curve and kind of seeing what was happening and what the trends were?
I love those changes. I love that technology change. And the reason is that technology has enabled, I can use me as a scenario where I can have, say, let's take Resolve. So Resolve Studio used to cost, back in the 80s, $800,000 to do the color grade, the actual system, including the telecine. Now you can download Resolve absolutely free, and you can buy the full version of Resolve Studio for $500 on the App Store. That technology is fantastic. What that technology also has allowed other people to make films, and a good example would be the phone, where you take the iPhone, you can shoot, edit, and distribute on the phone now. I never had it when I grew up. I wish I did, but I never had it. Now you have it, so what makes you stand out from the rest of the pack is going to come back down to three things that I learned back in 2016 was story, which is really, really important. And that technology has now enabled us now to do that. I think I love technology, and a simple thing here, you either evolve or you die. And that's how you have to think now. And with AI's been around for the last 50 years. It's just really come to light in the last 2 years. AI's been in post-production probably the last 5 to 10 years without you knowing it, like removing background noise, color correcting, all that sort of stuff. It's going to come more and more in use. I think it will have a positive and it will have a negative. But it's up to you as an individual person how you deal with that. As a producer and editor, I think it's another tool where it's going to help me out. Where you don't need as many crew or many people in post to do that project. So in theory, you should be able to bring the cost of that project down to a certain degree.
Is it almost as well accessibility? Because you touched on the fact that you would have loved to have had something like this as a kid. And do you think it's also opening the doors for a lot of other people who maybe previously weren't able to share a creative vision, perhaps because maybe the knowledge needed was a lot more significant compared to now, where, as you said, if you learn one platform, fundamentally you should be able to learn these other platforms because it still follows the same process. Do you think that's kind of what technology has allowed us to do, is open the door for other people to get in the industry that previously maybe wouldn't have been able to?
I think what's the technology has done now is enable, good example is a podcast, is enable people to tell these stories. And as human beings, we are creative people. But like me and like you, Jamie, we enable ourselves to tell our stories, whereas other people couldn't do that before. But now, with the changes in technology, it has enabled people to tell these stories. And I think that's great. But the problem with that is that you got 1,000 or 1,000,000 stories being told at the same time. So how do you make your story stand out from everybody else's story? That is the hard part, and that always will be there. I don't think that will change. YouTube has enabled that to happen, but YouTube is sunk with so much content on there. How do you make your content stand out? That's the hard part.
And I'm curious, because in terms of workflow, because you've worked on a variety of different formats, like I said in your intro, like you've worked on shorts, you've worked on feature films, you've worked on documentaries, but I think the thing I'd be curious to know from you, Edward, is what are the key differences in the process of editing a short to a film to a documentary? Is there a different workflow that you take? Is there a different vision that you have to have? Is there a different mentality you have to have when you're working on these certain projects? When you come to edit these different formats, what's in mind? Like, for example, the big difference between a feature and a documentary. What are the core differences from an editing perspective that you need to keep in mind?
So with feature film, you have a script and you have the footage that is shot. So you read the script first, and when I'm editing, I don't go back to the script unless I need to. I actually cut to what is in front of me, the pictures. So let the pictures tell the story. And here's an interesting thing about editing, and George Lucas said this, and it's a weird thing. You're editing the film project, but somehow that project takes its own shape. And the reason it takes its own shape is you're limited to what you have brought into what has been shot. So editing for a drama is a lot more easier than, say, editing a documentary. Because with the documentary, a doco is actually shaped in editing. You may have the treatment, which would be the script outline, what you're trying to shoot. You do the interviews, but when you're in editing, say one interview may change or somebody makes an interesting comment, you go, well, that's an interesting comment. We can follow this comment because this is opening up a different story to what we're originally trying to tell, which has happened in the past in other documentaries. So they're two totally different things. And in editing, they are. Even though in the doco, you know what you're trying to tell, the story you're trying to shape, but it's still shaped in post a lot more heavier than to a drama. Because I think drama's a lot more easy to edit than docos, in my personal opinion.
So it is interesting, Edward, because it almost sounds like you're saying that for a documentary, the editor is really the one that's in control of the creative flow and kind of telling the story, whereas in the feature film, it's the director that's on set on that day. Is that kind of an interesting dynamic to kind of have? And is there sometimes clashes in that way? Because obviously the director is always going to have a certain vision compared to the editor.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the whole point of the editor, and you do clash, but at the end of the day, you're clashing for one thing only. You're clashing for what is best for the story, what's best for the project. So it's not about your own ego. It's like, hey, does this work, or does A work or B work? What makes the audience understand the story? That is the key. So you can, and you come at, I remember when I was editing with Tim for Crackheads, And Tim goes, oh, let's get rid of this shot. I said, no, we need to keep the shot. I think the shot needs to stay in, and this is my reason why. And you turn around and say, well, that's a really good, fair point, and we kept the shot in. Then I'll say to him, oh, we need to cut this shot. And he'll say to me, why? I say, well, I don't think we need to have these guys here because it's not telling the audience anything. It's a waste of space. Let's get rid of it. And then we cut it out and he goes, oh yeah, it works much better. But you always challenge each other. Why do we need to keep this? And that's for every single cut. What? Because film and TV is a visual. It's not audio, it's a visual media. That picture is telling 1,000 words to the audience. What are we trying to tell our audience in that frame? And that goes all the way back to on set as well. And also, if you're using the archive material, what are you trying to tell in the archive? What do you want the audience to see? What emotion you want the audience to take away from that shot as well?
Is there also an element of pace as well? So I'm guessing with documentary, you have a little bit more freedom in terms of being able to be a bit slower with your edits and being a bit more careful in terms of including more information, whereas I'm imagining with features, you have to be a little bit more quick, unless there's a particular reason why you might be slowing down the pace of the edit. When determining pace in separate projects, Edward, what's some of the key factors that you try to think about when you are editing various projects?
So you talk to the director and ask he or her what style they're looking for, and they may have a style in their mind. What's the pacing? And it comes back down to what from a shot on set. So one thing I love is nice long shots or camera movement that's telling a story. I love that stuff, because why should I put a cut in there if you can do that on camera and it's telling that story within 20 seconds or 30 seconds, or it could be a minute long, where sometimes it's nice to let the actors talk on screen, where it works really, really well. So pacing does vary. If it's an action sequence, you go cut faster. But again, it's down to what you're trying to tell on screen. Sometimes that one shot sums up the whole action sequence. So it varies. And I know audiences today tend to switch off for if it's too boring, or they need a lot of pacing. But sometimes if you have too much cutting, you lose the audience at the same time as well, because people can switch off. And you don't assume that the audience is not clever. The audience is clever. They know what's going on. And they can work out story beats more than what you are doing. So you're trying to keep the audience engaged all the way through the film.
Almost like writing a piece of music. You're trying to find investment in the long shots for the emotional parts, and then driving the speed, like you said, with action, which is interesting. And one other thing I wanted to touch on, because I think this is a common thing you see people heading up, anyone from the post-production side of things, in regards to like the big TV series or the big films that you see coming out now, where people are challenging the idea of continuity and how it doesn't fit together sometimes. How does that become an issue for you ever? Have you found that sometimes continuity can be a hard thing to maintain, or is it something that you hold close to your heart, that continuity for you is a very important part, like making sure that the story is linear in a sense and is told in a way that there's not any kind of mistakes in that front?
I remember James Napier Robson said to me a very interesting point. He said, if the camera goes out of defocus, there's a continuity error, but the performance is brilliant. He said, you don't sacrifice that performance. You keep that performance and you ignore the continuity error. But the interesting thing about continuity error now is that you probably can fix that up in post-production now if you really, really wanted to. But performance overrides any, in my personal opinion, over continuity error or even a technical fault with the camera, because you can't get that performance back again.
Do you think that's something that you kind of have to learn over time? Because, yeah, there's probably the things that people in most of the educational institutions will say, no, this is the correct way of doing it. Do you feel like that's kind of like a wee tidbit that you've learned from guys like James, who have said, like, sometimes you just have to appreciate sort of the mistakes, because sometimes the best stuff will still be in there?
Yeah, I think editing's changed storytelling's changed a lot now, where you used to have those rules where they don't cross the line, but I think that's all changed now. If you look at a lot of the stuff, a lot of the content that's made now, people cross the line, and you don't really notice it that much now. And I think, with story-wise, if there's a continuity error, well, you ignore it. If it's at least it's something so bad that it sticks out. But then, if it's something that, you always have continuity errors. I've come across it quite a lot of times, and it's a little bit frustrating. You can cut around, you can zoom in to rectify that mistake, or sometimes you go, you know what, we're going to ignore this because this performance is actually really, really good. And if people concentrate on continuity, then we've lost them already. So, and when people look at, oh, it's a continuity fault, that'd be the second or third time that they have watched that film, because they shouldn't be picking it up straight away because you've lost him. You understand where I'm coming from.
Definitely, no, 100%. And I think that's a nice point for me to kind of move into the next area, because we've talked about you and the edit suite and the post-production suite, but you then pivoted into producing, which is great because we talked about this off mic and before we even actually met Edward, which is the fact that you ended up bringing yourself a little bit closer to home where I am, which is in Argentina, because you worked on The Story of Rugby, which is a docuseries which was released in the build-up to the Rugby World Cup, talking about the history of the sport. I have to ask, was it daunting tackling such a big project and subject matter? Because it's a pretty big topic and pretty close to a lot of Kiwis' hearts. How did you feel taking on that project? That must have been incredible.
Yeah, I remember back in 2017, I think it was, Stephen O'Mar came in DigiPost, pitched the idea of doing a TV series Story of Rugby, and somehow I got involved in the project with him, and I believe in his vision. And I learnt so much from Stephen as a producer, because I was watching, and at the same time I learnt a lot from the DOP, Drew, and learnt what he was learning, what he was doing on set. I was asking him questions. And what I picked up from Stephen was the story beats of how he paced those 6 episodes. And it's like any big production, it's chaos, but all that magic happens in the post-production where it is worked out. But the great thing about Story of Rugby, I got to travel all around the world. Went to North America, Europe, Asia Pacific, and South America. I even went to Brazil for 3 days filming, even though Brazil does play rugby, but ended up going down to Brazil. So it was a great opportunity to travel around the world, and that was, to me, that was my big OE, working on a big budget documentary series. And I learnt so much on that, on Story, and also learnt a lot, not what to do at the same time. So I learnt that alcohol, if you're doing some data backups with alcohol, don't go hand in hand. Well, that's a hint.
Oh, yeah. No, you told me there was a casualty from the data transfer.
Yeah, my mistakes. Oh, whoopsie daisy. Okay, I need to fix this error. I know what to do. Problem solved.
Throw it in some rice.
Yeah.
So. Do you mind me asking which country were you in when this happened? I'm going to take a stab and say Argentina.
No, it was Germany. Oktoberfest.
Oh no, that seems almost like you needed an insurance policy just for that alone. And I'm curious, because you would have been around the San Isidro Rugby Club. Was it quite interesting learning about the, obviously, origins of rugby in so many different countries, particularly maybe countries you didn't really know had such a big rugby culture?
Yeah, it's interesting because I got the chance to go to the top universities in the world. I went to Oxford University, Cambridge, Yale. So got to travel to those universities where, to be honest, it's only Wales, New Zealand and the Pacific Islands where rugby is the major sport, where everybody plays it. The rest of the world is actually played by universities. It is. So rugby is still classed as upper class sports. Rugby leagues play in Australia where the thugs play, and then football is played by, there's an old saying, by thugs. Rugby's played by gentlemen. So the two different sports. And the great thing about rugby is that You could be supporting Argentina. I would say I'd be supporting the All Blacks. If Argentina beat the All Blacks, or vice versa, there's no animosity. It's okay, rugby won tonight, and we'd be in the pub. But if it's football, there'd be fights outside, left, right, and centre. Just two different sports. And when you go to a rugby stadium, you don't see a 6 foot or 8 foot fence in front of you. There's none. Football, you do.
That's very accurate, especially for here. I've definitely been to my fair few local derbies here, and I mean derbies because, yeah, as you said, you're fenced off from, and sometimes the supporters of the other team aren't even allowed in the stadium, which, yeah, I don't think I could ever imagine that happening in rugby. Was it interesting for you to be able to tell that story? And for a lot of people that probably were watching it, what was the audience you had in mind when you were cutting together that documentary? Was it someone who was completely oblivious to the rugby culture, the sport itself, or was it kind of a little bit for the old heads as well?
For documentary Story of Rugby, it'd be a combination of both. So we're introducing people into the sports and the history of rugby, but at the same time, people who do follow that sports, they get to understand the history of the actual sports. Because rugby did shape a lot of nations, it shaped New Zealand. It had a lot of influence from the upper class. And a good example, I went to River Plate Stadium. The great thing about, and then you're absolutely right there, Jamie, where the other teams are not allowed in there. The audience for that sports team can't come in to watch. It's just that local team audience are allowed only to watch that game only, because whereas rugby, everybody comes to watch the game. It's just, yeah, it's a really good experience. And one of the good things about Story of Rugby, you end up going to a prison in Argentina, out of all places, pretty sure it's Argentina, where they use rugby to educate the inmates. And basically, rugby was so successful for the prisoners playing rugby that teach them to conform to society better. And the reason behind that was that there's a position for everybody in rugby to play for the 15 positions. Whereas in football, you may have 3 or 4 players who are really, really talented that take the who actually take the stardom. Whereas for rugby, all 15 players have to work together. There's no stars in rugby. You're working as a team. And basically what this program did was it taught the prisoner inmates to work as a team. And the thing is, we're in prison, filming these people, and it's like, you felt safe, but at the same time, you also got to remind yourself, we're actually in prison. Yeah. And the prison guys actually bought themselves not a full-size rugby team, full-size rugby paddock, but it was like a 60% rugby paddock, rugby sports field that they played on. So it's just really interesting and to go into a prison and shoot about these inmates. It was. So it was an interesting experience that was, I thought.
And you talked about it was your OE. Was that the furthest you've gone, Edward? Aside from obviously the classic trip that most Kiwis do, which is between Australia and New Zealand, would you say that was like the furthest you've gone outside of New Zealand as well?
Yes, I've been to the UK, and it was going to South America. I love Argentina. The best steak I ever had was in Argentina, out of all places. So it was good to go down there, getting paid to do what you love doing anyway. So it's great.
Is it kind of funny when you get to the end of a project like the Story of Rugby, when you're finally doing the final mix down, putting everything out? Does it feel is there almost like a sadness because you get so invested in a project, and because you were there on the ground during the days when they were shooting and you got to see these locations, meet these people? Does it feel weird finishing a project? Do you ever have a feeling of being like, oh, it's over now, like this is it, this is like the marker on this certain point? How does it feel for you when you come to the end of a project like that?
Yeah, it's funny because you come to the end of the project, you go, shit, I need to find another project or another job. That's how you look at it. And that's being honest. And it gets to, it's no different to making Devils and the Horses. You get to a certain stage where it's where you care, but you don't care. You have to, I have to let it go. This is it. Because if you don't let it go, it will never ever get released. So there's a time where you say, no, that's finished, or you may have a deadline where the project has to be delivered by this date. That's why you have those deadlines. And for the Story of Rugby, it was for it got broadcast just before the Rugby World Cup, because that's where it reached its peak audience.
I'm actually curious in touching on that as well, because this is the thing. It's like anyone who's an artist, is that you sometimes have to get to that degree of being like, I need to be happy with this. This is as good as it's going to be. If I work on this too much, it could end up being a worse product. Is there a sense of you have to kind of take yourself out of the project and think of it from the perspective of, as you said, there's a deadline, there's something that needs to be done, there's only so far I can go with this edit before it just ends up being like I'm nitpicking at something?
I totally agree. It's like we did the calligraphy, we'll say Devils on the Horses, and I'll go back and change a few things. And I had a deadline, which was 1st of May. It had to be delivered. So okay, 2 weeks before the deadline, I delivered the film, and I just turn and say, hey, it's the best I can do. I can probably go and fix some stuff up, but it's like, you know what? I gotta let go. And it's hard because you can tweak for the rest of your life on any project that you do, because you'll never ever be happy with what you've done because you are for that perfection. The problem is, as human beings, we can never get that perfection because it can't, because what's in your brain never translate on screen. It may change with AI, where you visualize in the brain to go on screen by doing those prompts, but yeah, you have to let it go. As George Lucas did when he did Star Wars, he went back and retooled it to refix those mistakes that he originally had to get his vision across. But for me, I just had to let it go.
Ain't it being an artist, Edward? It's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be close, but never perfect.
Yeah, exactly. It'll never be perfect because you shoot something, you go, if they did this, if I only got this shot or this angle, I could have added that into the cut. But that never happened. So, okay, we go with what we have. And it's the same with any project. It's like, I remember saying Timothy Crackheads, I said, if only we had a reverse shot right here, it would have been fantastic. He goes, we just didn't have time to grab that shot. I said, that's a bummer because it would have been really, really nice. But I said, that's my wish list. But it never happened, and you got to let it go.
Moving on, because you became a producer on another film not too long ago, which was The Turn of the Screw, which you did back in 2020. And it's interesting that you took on something which was a pretty well-known classic, and also, like, obviously a pre-existing intellectual property, but you reimagined it and set it in New Zealand. I'm curious, how was it taking on Turn of the Screw? Because that must have been daunting, because I did also see that there was a very similarly made project released in the same year as well. Another Turn of the Screw version, which was released, I believe, in the UK. What was it like for you guys working on that? And what were some of the pressures or the different challenges that you had being on the producer side of things?
Yeah, so Alex Gavin, who I got a really good relationship, Alex pitched me the idea of, let's do a movie called Turn of the Screw. His pitch was, it's going to be set in the theatre. So it's like a play, and then suddenly that play comes to life. And he said to me, the film is going to be driven by the sound. And I got it straight away. So when we started editing it, I didn't do the first cut of the film. Another person did the first cut. Then I came in and as a producer went through with Alex and started trimming and said, hey, this is really good. I understand where you're coming from. I loved his take on the actual intellectual property, because he said it's been done several times. It's like, how do you make your product stand out from those other projects, which would be more of a budget? Is, okay, let's set ours in the theatre where everything comes to life in her mind overnight. And that was a different take that Alex took on the film. And it was a really good take, and the performance in the film was fantastic. And that movie was shot in, I think it was shot in 12 or 13 days, it was. So it was a pretty fast-paced shoot it was.
Jeez, and for you guys, did it at any point feel like it was rushed, or do you feel like it was so well prepared and put together that it just happened that it was shot that quickly?
You need to ask Alex that question here, but I think it was shot pretty fast. So it was, yeah. But it came out good. So I said to Alex, there was only one shot I wished it was longer. It was a nice long shot that I really liked, that the camera shifted a little bit. And I said if only it was longer, a little bit more. But he said the actress sort of stuffed up on your line. It was no drama. We just cut around it. But it's like those nice little shots that I like, that her wheel was upside down, and Pete, who did the colour grade for Turn of Screw, which also did Devils on Horse, did a fantastic job on the colour grade. And the guys who did the sound mix did a fantastic job bringing that sound to life, because the movie really stood out in the theatre with the sound, because it made you feel like, oh, we're in the theatre. Where the actual storyline takes place. And that was really sound driven, the film was. So that sound made a huge difference for the film.
Love that. And that's the thing. There's so many different aspects that you can take from, whether it be visual audio. It's the power of editing, which is beautiful. And that brings us to the kind of the end of this chat, Edward, but we can't not touch on Devils on Horses, which you were kind enough to send to me before we had this chat, which I have to say, it was an incredible documentary. Even more so, we had a wee chat off before we jumped on and had a chat, which is about the fact that my great-grandfather was actually an mounted rifleman as well, which in exactly the same era. So watching that was really I don't know, it just made me think about my family, the history that we have from that sense. And I have to ask, because I thought, well, the Navy background, it makes sense, but where did the desire come from to produce this documentary about World War One and the brave men who were part of the mounted cavalry in New Zealand? Where did it come from?
So basically, I love history. I think history should be told in the correct story-wise. So how Devils on Horses came back was my partner on the project, old Terry. His great-granddad, like your granddad, was in the Canterbury Mounted Rifle Regiment. I got introduced from a good friend of mine, Tanya Wheeler, introduced me to Terry, and we started talking about it. And Tanya wrote a very good script as a feature film. And we looked at trying to get that off the ground. I said, well, we ain't going to get this off the ground. This was back in 2017, 2018. So I thought, well, let's do a docudrama and tell it, because there's lots of archive material, and that's how that story came about. And the great thing about making a doco is that it's all networking. So you talk to somebody, and they say, hey, Ed, have you contacted this person? I said, no, I haven't contacted that person. Well, can you do an introduction email to this person and on my behalf? And that's what people do, and that's how you meet people. So I interview people in Australia, New Zealand, and Turkey, because I always was fascinated by the Turkish side of the story of them in the Sinai-Palestine campaign, because I felt, hang on, you're not just fighting against the Turks, but I want to understand how they got involved in the First World War and what is from their perspective from the Ottoman Empire. So Devils on the Horses was something that the Sinai-Palestine campaign is not a big known history in the First World War. Everybody concentrates on the Western Front, which was a bloodbath, whereas the Sinai-Palestine was mainly men on horses, vast land, not many conflicts. There were conflicts, but those conflicts were over in a day or a few days, whereas the Western Front just lasted for a good 4 years. So they're totally different. And the thing about the Sinai-Palestine campaign was the boys, or say the soldiers, had horses. And those horses what really interested me. And when I mentioned the story to Stephen O'Mar and Gary Little, who used to run DigiPost, what we're doing, he said, Ed, concentrate on the horses, because that's a really interesting story where that hasn't been told before, where those soldiers had their mate, which was the horse. In the Western Front, you didn't have that. So that's how that story came about. And over the last 4 years of telling that story, we finally finished the film. But it's been a long journey, but it's been an extraordinary journey because what makes a documentary different is that you meet some fantastic people. And when you tell people what you're trying to do, they get on the bandwagon and they support you. And that's what happened on this project.
And when you talk about the fact that you met a lot of people, how did you go about approaching a lot of these people? Because you said you were making connections in Turkey, among other places. Was that something that you took on yourself, or you had a team that was helping you? Because that's quite a monumental undertaking for yourself, Edward, to be putting this all together.
So I actually did everything myself. So I'm the main producer on the project with my partner Terry. I took the lead, so it's the first time I actually taken the lead, which is good because it teaches you work with people, you budgeting, you're dealing with legal side of things, you're dealing with location shoots. So I took all that myself, and it was more easy for me to do that because then when people know, oh, you're the producer, they can deal with you directly. So I caught up with one of the guys I interviewed on the project, Peter Woods, and he was fantastic help because he gave me 3 or 4 people to contact. And then you talk to other people that help out as well. So my partner Terry, because we shot down in Ashburton at Plains Railway Trust, and somehow, this is a weird thing, we wanted a steam train in the documentary. I don't know where that came from, but it's like, oh, okay, horses, soldiers, period film, a steam train. Wow, this is what you want to do for filmmaking. This is fantastic. I don't know how it got in there, but it did get in there. And we're shooting a steam train. It's like, oh wow. I remember my first AD / art director Ra, and it's just got to go back to think. This is an interesting thing about crews. Our crew was only 4 of us. It was me doing the camera work, Ra doing my first AD, my daughter Sophie jumped in there as well to be my first AC when she wasn't acting. So she was jumping between the 2 roles. And then we had Terry's wife just taking behind the scenes stills. And then there was more cast than crew. And the great thing about this is, I believe in what technologies allow us to do, is that you don't need to have lots of people on set. You can have a reduced amount of people that can do that. And the great thing about Kiwis is that there's no unions here, and we all help each other out. We dig in, and you're doing multiple jobs, but you're working together because you believe in that project. And
that's incredible. So you managed to have a lean project of only 4 of you that put together this project, this documentary. Only 4.
And yeah, exactly. And this is what I love about New Zealand. We're in the pub, and we just spent the Friday shooting after Anzac Day last year down Ashburton. And I talked to the Neil who drove the train. I said, Neil, I need some tents. I need World War I tents because my partner can't get hold of his tents. And he goes, I know someone's got these World War I tents. Gets on the phone. This is at 7 o'clock at night time. Rings up the guy. Hey, there's a film crew here. They're shooting us a World War I documentary. They need some World War I tents. Can we borrow the tent? And Neil goes, when do you need the tents by? I said, oh, tomorrow afternoon would be great for the shoot. He said, I got you the tents. And he turned around and said to me, Ed, I'm going to pick up the tents tonight. I said, oh, thanks. How far away is it? He goes, it's only half an hour's drive. But those tents made a difference because it enabled us to cheat our shot even more. Shooting Canterbury to make it look like they were shooting in Cyanide Poundstone campaign. But it's just everybody's working together to bring it in. And the reason they supporting you because they believe in what you're trying to tell. That is the key. And to be any feature film that may have a low budget or a high, more low budgets, people reduce their rates because they believe in the story or they believe in that person. You know what, I'm going to support that person because I believe in what they're doing is right.
Is this something you expected when you first started producing this project, that people were going to come together and collaborate with you like in this sort of way?
No, I think not really. But then as we got more into the story, because I shot 17 people for the interviews. It was all networking. People say, contact this person. They'd be a really good person. A friend of mine, he's a lawyer, said to me, hey, Ed, I can get you a contact at the Turkish embassy. Then they say, hey, Ed, you need to contact this person from Turkey. And this person here goes, you need to contact this person. It's just all introduction emails. And when I interviewed Professor Masoud, I originally was going to go to Turkey to shoot him. And then I get an email out of the blue from him, goes, Edward, I'm going to be in Sydney for 6 months. It'd be a good time for you to come over and interview me there. So what I did was, okay, I'll come to Sydney and I'll interview you, but also I'm going to interview 2 other people at the same time. And then I got in contact with the Anzac Memorial Museum. Hey, can I come in there and film? They said, yeah. Do you have insurance? I got insurance, but my insurance policy was like 2 million, not 5 million. And they said, no, we'll take a waiver, let you come in and film. And like, everybody's really supportive because they're supporting the project. And even when getting hold of the archive material, and here's a classic story where I was doing something for Napoleon. I got asked, Ed, you need to go to the 6th Battalion Army in Grey Lynn. Oh, okay. Don't want to go, but I'll go. I go there, talk to the old soldiers about my project. Then one of the guys goes, oh, you need to talk to this person here. So I talk to him. He goes, oh, I have some archival material from the Sinai-Palestine campaign. I go, wow. I said, how many photographs? He goes, 110 images, and they're being digitally remastered or captured. And I didn't think much about it. So I go over to Don's place, and Don shows me the pictures. I go, wow, these are cool. I need to capture these. He goes, I've got digital copies. And when I'm thinking of digital copies, I'm thinking of low res. They come out and they're high res. And here's ironic about this story is that I was introduced by somebody who said, you need to contact this person, but unfortunately this person had passed away. And that was that same person that actually had these images. So it was
incredible.
It was an interesting story. And those images, I said, who owns them? He goes, well, they're our copyright. This is the person that shot them. Just put his name in the credit. And that's what I did.
It's beautiful. I love that. It's almost like it's taken in a story of itself, and it would almost be interesting to see the making of the documentary, because it sounds like it is just a community-driven film in the sense, and I love the fact that the story of the pub down in Ashburton, very classic Ashburton, or very classic Canterbury, to be fair. And I do agree with you. I think that's the kind of endearing thing about New Zealand culture. And once again, you're the second person I've heard in television production who said it's good that we don't have the unions. People are willing to kind of like put in the graft, work hard, and maybe take on a role that they don't usually do just to kind of help out with things, which is great. And Edward, I want to leave on one last question, which is, obviously you've been in the industry for a long time now. You've gone through the different waves of everything. You've gone from being an editor to now a producer, filmmaker yourself. Is there anything you would change about the career trajectory you've had? Or looking back, is there anything that you would say to someone who's looking at entering the industry? What would be the advice you'd give to them?
Isn't that ironic? Because my daughter wants to do film and TV. So, and that's why I said to her, oh, so if you want to be in film and TV, come work on me on Story of Devils on Horses. This would be a good relationship between you and I, and also at the same time see if you like it. And to be honest, it's a fickle industry. Arts is. It's an up and down industry. You can have no work for 6 months, or you may be flat out. My suggestion is go with what you think is right, because there's no right. Make stories. There's no excuse now. The technology is sitting right in front of you. It's on the phone. Make stories. And that's how you learn your craft. So, and that's why I said to my daughter, just make them. You learn from the mistakes. You know what the mistakes are. And you can fix those mistakes. And here's an interesting thing. I'm going to see the film. I haven't seen the movie for 2 months. I'm going to see it on the big screen with the full color grade, the sound mix. with a live audience, that is the buzz, where you walk out and hear the audience, hey, I really enjoyed that film. That's what you want to hear. That's the buzz. But I think the whole buzz of making a movie is doing that process on set, editorial, seeing it coming together. That's the magic, the color grade, the sound mix coming together, the sound mixer. That's the whole process is fun. That is really hard to explain to people who have not done that as a craft person, if you understand where I'm coming from, Jamie.
Completely understand where you're coming from, Edward. It's a classic thing of it. It's like it's a classic saying that people have where they're like, oh, having a child changes your life. It makes you a different person. But I feel like it's the same with a creative project or working on something or working in the creative industry. Anytime you get to see someone's reaction to what you've put through, as you described, is always the greatest buzz, regardless of whether it's good or bad, because you know the next time that you're going to be releasing something, you'll get some more kind of input from other people. I couldn't agree more. And Edward, I just want to say thank you so much for chatting with us today. And the last thing I want to go through is if people want to find out more about your work in the film and television industry, or they want to get in touch to learn more about Devils on Horses and where they can view it, how can they get in touch with you, Edward?
So basically, Doc Edge Film Festival has got the release for Devils on Horses in June and July in New Zealand. We're currently in talks with distribution companies overseas, so they'll probably roll out slowly over the next 12 months. And the other thing is you can visit my website, samsonpictures.com, and it'll give you a background on Devils on Horses, the film. So that's where we are at this stage. So you have to be in New Zealand to watch the film at the moment. But hopefully that will change over the next several months.
If you like the podcast, I'd love for you to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and let me know your thoughts on the show. Don't forget, you can reach out to me via Instagram at beyondbroadcastpod or via email at beyondbroadcastpod@gmail.com. Until next time, take it easy.